Did the late Queen go silent when Prince Harry called her at Buckingham Palace? What was behind William's rebellion at the state visit? What was behind President Macron's wink at Katherine? And what now for Prince Andrew after some big FBI news? We have lots of royal stories to talk about this week. Welcome to Palace Confidential. I'm Jo Elvin, and on today's panel is the Mail on Sunday's editor-at-large, Charlotte Griffiths, and the Daily Mail's diary editor, Richard Eden. It's great to see both of you. Now, you know what comes next, this bit where I give you your weekly reminder now to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Just hit that button, it costs you nothing, and it helps us out a ton. And make sure that you never miss another episode of this or any of our other brilliant shows. Next week, we're putting out a special episode where we answer your royal questions, and the way to make sure that you don't miss that, you know what I'm going to say, is to subscribe to get the notification when it's out. And up next, it's our Acting Royal Marathon, so do stick around for that. Okay, that's all the housekeeping. Let's get going. Richard, let's start with what will be one of the grandest occasions of this entire royal year, won't it? The state visit from France. Tell us all about it.
Really will. I love state visits. They're great. It's a chance to sort of show royalty at its finest. And
I got very stressed just looking at the table layout. I couldn't believe how many, it seems like there were thousands of pieces on that table.
Yeah, I mean, the effort that goes into that state banquet at Windsor Castle was amazing. But this is the French state visit with Emmanuel Macron, the president, and his wife Brigitte. It's the first state visit for a while, and the first one that Katherine's taken part in for quite some time.
Yeah.
But it's been really significant. I've read a few people saying, oh, it's the first visit by a European leader since Brexit. But it's not really true, because we've had others. We've had the Spanish, but the Spanish head of state, for example, is the king.
Yeah.
So it wasn't the Prime Minister who came, it was the King and Queen. But of course, President of France is their head of state, so he's been here. He gave a speech talking about how the traditional entente cordiale has become entente amicale.
Okay, yeah.
So we're more friendly than just cordial these days.
Are we?
The government obviously thought this visit was really important because they're very keen to improve relations with European Union after Brexit. So it's seen as a very important visit. And I think we've had glorious sunshine in London and Berkshire, and so far it's gone very well, I'd say.
Indeed. And a big occasion for King Charles, of course.
Of course, because it's so easy for us to forget that he is still undergoing cancer treatment.
Yeah.
But he's been working very hard, and unfortunately this week he had a bloodshot right eye. And the palace was keen to stress that this was nothing to do with his cancer treatment, but was just something unrelated. But it did sort of highlight the strains that he's under. But he made a very good speech. The king loves France, and that's really come across. And you get the impression that he's enjoyed the visit.
Yeah, indeed. Well, they're our neighbours, aren't they? Charlotte, lots of eyes as well on the affectionate nature between William and Katherine at their state banquet.
I know Katherine and William are so at ease with each other these days. They always have been, but they're in this new era now where they're just kind of madly in love, and they're not hiding it from us anymore. You know, before they could never really hold hands, and they were quite guarded, especially when the Queen was alive, about touching each other. But now they've got this real ease between them, often touching each other's backs. And Katherine gazes up into William's eyes. It's just really nice. They were completely and utterly in love. It was divine.
Well, speaking of affection, Richard, there was a couple of funny moments, wasn't there? There was one between President Macron of France and Katherine, wasn't there?
He's a cheeky one, that president.
That was quite a French laugh.
William might need to watch out, actually.
Yeah.
Well, he I think certainly likes to see himself as a sort of flirtatious type, and we did spot a wink at Katherine, as I think maybe they were doing their toast, their glasses at that point. But
and he kissed her hand.
I think winking, you don't wink at our future queen, do you?
Apparently you do if you're the President of France.
If only he and Brigitte were so close. I don't think Macron and Brigitte are as close as William and Katherine somehow at the moment.
There's been lots of talk about the body language between the French president and his wife. There was that incident as they came off an aeroplane elsewhere. And I think again here there was an incident where the president sort of put out his hand to take his wife, and she declined the offer of her husband's hand.
Maybe that's
And
why
then-
he's looking for some affection
Well, by
by proxy from other people at the moment.
Maybe that's what he's doing, having
Yeah.
a flirt with Katherine. But
Well,
by
anyway.
contrast, Katherine and William did extend his hand to Katherine. I think she was getting off a plinth. And of course, she allowed her lovely husband to take her hand. So it really was a contrast, I thought.
And also social media was rife with chat because saying that Macron had broken protocol with that and by touching the king's back. What's your view?
Well, he's a very touchy-feely man, is Emmanuel Macron. As we know, we've seen him do these kind of things before. But I mean, generally, he hasn't been too bad. Just the odd,
Is that the benchmark now? Is it not too bad?
The odd wink.
I mean, it's fine, isn't it? Is it really that big a deal?
But he did touch the Colream Guards back, and that is quite naughty.
Is it?
And they're supposed to shout out and say, "Hands off the King's Guard." And the man he touched did whip round, and he was going to say that, and then he stopped himself because he realised it was Macron that was touching him. They're very guarded, A, because they're guards, and B, because the tourists come round and they kind of hassle them and make faces at them. So they don't like it at all. It's not allowed.
No.
But yet Macron, the French tourist in the room, stroked his back.
I mean, anyone who's been to London as a tourist and seen the guards, on horseback, knows that you shouldn't approach, and if you do, they will shout at you.
Oh yeah, no, they can be quite aggressive. Yeah.
Yeah. So the idea when the soldiers are on parade, you don't start putting your hands on them.
No, it's just what happens when you're a world leader. You just have no one ever tells you not to do something, do they?
But anyway, he's lucky that he didn't get anything painful from that soldier.
Yes, the whole thing is supposed to join nations together, not create more rifts. But Charlotte, let's move on to Katherine. This was a big appearance for her, and judging by the media coverage from across the world, a really crucial one.
It was a big, big deal. It's the first time we've seen her in a tiara for nearly 2 years. And because she's back on parade in a very, very formal capacity. And she looked fantastic. It was so nice for, everyone that loves Katherine around the world to see her back, really leading the royal family. And, doing such a formal occasion. It's a sign that she's getting better, and she's sort of also more empowered than ever. She really is starting to look regal and like a future queen in waiting.
It's incredible, isn't it?
She's been much missed at the previous state
Yes.
visits. Like when we had the Japanese here last summer, Katherine wasn't there because of her illness, and again with the Qataris, you might remember she met them to greet them, but didn't attend the banquet. So it's wonderful to have her in a tiara and back at the banquet again.
Well, speaking of what she's wearing, we know that Katherine would prefer we didn't focus on her outfits, but how can you not? I mean, it was just a diplomatic triumph, really, wasn't it? Full of hidden meanings.
Well, the first outfit, the Dior outfit, I thought was inspired because it's that classic Dior French silhouette. And then the state banquet outfit as well was this beautiful cape by Givenchy, by Sarah Burton, her old friend. And she also
designed her wedding dress.
designed her wedding dress. And she also wore the Order of King Charles III, which is a small portrait of Charles that you wear on your left shoulder.
And am I right in thinking that we haven't seen that before?
No, this is the first time she's worn one of those. She has previously worn one for Queen Elizabeth II.
Yeah.
But this is the first time we've seen her wearing her father-in-law, a little tiny portrait of her father-in-law on her left shoulder. It's really, really sweet to see.
Apparently, the tiara is a bit of a favourite of Catherine's.
She loves the Lover's Knot tiara, which is the one she wore.
I think I do too.
I do. I'd quite like it.
Yeah.
Maybe she'll loan it to me one day. But Diana used to wear it a lot as well. And it's a really iconic, very, very regal tiara. She looks beautiful. And then coupled with these beautiful earrings that, of course, belong to the late Queen, and just really paints her as this sort of leader of the royal family, future Queen.
Well, in terms of outfits, it's all tick, 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 ticks across the board for Katherine. Let's move on to William, which, Richard, I believe you've uncovered a bit of a controversy in what he was wearing.
Yeah, I mean, at these occasions, obviously all the focus is on the women, quite rightly, because they look amazing. But there was something very interesting with Prince William at the state banquet, actually, which is most of the other men, like the King, Prince Edward, and Princess Anne's husband, Vice Admiral Tim Lawrence, they were all wearing what's known as the Windsor Uniform. Now, this is a historic outfit that dates back to George III, and it's a sort of sign of loyalty to the crown. It's basically like a sort of black morning coat with a red trim, so it's that distinctive red trim. And generally you wear this when at Windsor. But on this occasion, William didn't. people say this is significant, actually. It could be seen as a sort of act of rebellion.
Not just stuck at the dry cleaners?
No, I think it was, from what I'm told, it's that he wants to forge his own path. So he's saying, I don't have to wear everything. Yes, we've got these traditions, but I don't always have to wear it. So don't get me wrong, he looked very elegant, and he was wearing white tie with his Order of the Garter sash as well. So, he's hardly turned up looking shabby. But he didn't wear that uniform. So it was significant. And he has worn it before. Our producers might be able to dig out photos of him back from Queen Elizabeth's 90th birthday celebrations in 2016, I think that was, where he was wearing the uniform as well as Prince Harry, and they looked very distinctive. So it's an interesting choice.
It is interesting when you think that the likes of Prince Edward were wearing it.
Yeah.
So.
No, I think that is the standard form. It's what you wear at Windsor. But, we've seen this with Prince William before.
Yes, he does seem to have an aversion to getting dressed up, doesn't he, Charlotte?
This is not the first time. It's very on brand for William to find his own way to wear an outfit. I couldn't actually believe it when this was the pared back outfit, because let's face it, he still looked pretty regal. But, you were reminding me earlier, last November there was an event, a very formal event he attended with his father, and his father wore these breeches with basically tights underneath. They're quite feminine, very old-fashioned.
Core.
At the diplomatic core. And, of course, William just wore trousers. And then, intriguingly, most of the pictures that were released by the palace were from the waist up. So almost like they'd met with disapproval.
Yes.
My theory on this is that, like that time with Prince Harry, when the Queen was still alive, maybe he wasn't sort of mature enough, but he didn't really have the guts to sort of say no to the Queen. But maybe with his dad, he's like, sorry, Dad, I'm not going to dress in a really old-fashioned way.
Because he never wears kilts either, does he?
He never wears kilts. He hates kilts. I do think in the future, when he is the king, in the distant future...
Well, you've preempted my next question. Will he just be forced to go back to the rigid tradition, or will he forge his own path?
I think he'll forge his own path. I think it's such a good question. I don't think he will feel obliged to suddenly start wearing this lavish regalia. I think he'll pare things back as much as he can get away with. But I think for state banquets, there has to be this sense of sort of majesty about it. So he'll recognise that. But the idea of wearing kilts and tights and breeches, skirts and tights aren't really on the menu. I can't even really imagine him wearing a very lavish crown at his coronation. I bet you he'll wear something quite pared back for that one day as well.
It's been really notable how keen the king is to respect these traditions, though. I mean, lots of people thought he wouldn't wear those breeches. He's wearing them with his buckle shoes, and I think they look fantastic. It's, it's a great, you see them, you think, wow, that's different.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously it's antiquated, but, monarchy is antiquated. It's part of the deal. So I think you modernise to some extent, but personally I like to keep up these old traditions, and they look great in their matching uniform, I think. I love that kind of red trim.
A kilt is quite a fabulous piece of Scottish tradition, as some of these other things are. They're steeped in history. What's the big deal?
I think part of it is a rebellion, because he's always been forced to rigidly adhere, ever since he was a child.
But isn't that part of being the royal family?
Yeah, but doesn't every generation rebel against the generation before? I think I can relate to his logic about sort of modernising the royal family, wanting, when he's monarch, to look a bit more modern and relatable. But I do think, in terms of the kilt, I think that's a wrong step, because, it's actually part of the Scottish heritage. It's not just some silly skirt, like the breeches. And I think it could be quite offensive. I'm not Scottish, but if I was Scottish, I'd say,
what's wrong with our traditional kilt?
Yeah, so I think he wants to tread carefully. He might want to rethink, and just be a little bit more careful about what he ditches and what he doesn't ditch when he's king one day.
I'm sure we'll be talking about this again. Now, moving on, Richard, you've been minxing again, because there was another controversy, wasn't there, that you've written about today that has to do with who was in the kitchen at the state banquet.
Well, this is just to do with the king's efforts for entente cordiale. He wanted to mix things up for the banquet and show that you mix up these traditions. So he asked his old friend Raymond Blanc, who's French by birth, but he's lived in Britain pretty much all his life. He's a great chef, and the king asked him to oversee the menu for the banquet. And so this was promoted. But someone who used to be a royal chef for Queen Elizabeth and other members of the royal family, called Darren McGrady, I think he now lives in the USA, and he's quite a figure, sort of public figure. But he said he thought it was a real slap in the face for the royal chefs. And I know
as in like how he would feel if he was still there.
Yeah, and I know what he means, because if you're like in this case, say Mark Flanagan is the head of the head chef for the royal household. And these banquets, they are the pinnacle of your work,
Yeah.
I mean, it's a chance to show off what you can do, and these menus are, they appear in all our newspapers. It's a really important event. Really takes lots of thought and consideration. So to then sort of bring someone into, oh yeah, you've got to answer to someone else, is problematic. But I spoke to Raymond Blanc about it, and he said, look, come on, he's friends with Mark Flanagan. He said it's just an attempt to bring in that French influence as well.
Right.
So
okay.
He's keen to say that things are all très bien.
So Mark will possibly be doing the Trump one on his own. Maybe.
I don't know. Maybe the king will ask an American to.
Oh yes, maybe. Yeah.
Lend a hand.
Who is a big American chef?
Well, there's loads. So Meghan Markle, perhaps.
Oh yes,
That's a good idea.
I'm joking.
Sprinkles for the state banquet.
What a great idea. Honestly, you're full of them, Richard. Now, moving on, Charlotte, the morning after the grand occasion, Queen Camilla was very keen to hot-foot it off to another pressing engagement with Hugh Grant.
I think bullets have left guns faster. She shot out of there straight into the royal box, and I can hardly blame her, because she must have been itching to get to Wimbledon. And of course, Hugh Grant was there. Who doesn't want to sit next to Hugh Grant? Actually, she was slightly in front of him. But then he rewarded her keenness by falling asleep. I'm sorry, if the Queen was in front of me, I would not fall asleep. Anyway, he dozed off.
I've heard the tennis was, pretty exciting.
The tennis was exciting.
Yeah.
I'm a royal watcher, so I would have been very excited about looking at the back of Camilla's head for 2 hours.
I'm afraid.
But no, he fell asleep.
I'm afraid from my experiences of Hugh Grant in person, on film, he always plays the charming.
Oh, well, he's not going to like
Englishman.
you. You're a diarist.
But he's not very
journalists.
charming. Even though we both went to the same school, actually, but he's not very charming in reality.
Well,
in
Camilla seemed
fairness-
smitten.
Pardon?
Camilla seemed smitten with
And
him.
her-
She
and
seemed
her sister.
totally charmed.
Well, in fairness to Hugh, royal box, it's not really, there's no shelter really particularly, is it? It's very hot. He's probably had a couple of Pims out the back. It's a recipe for
I don't know about
sleepiness.
that. He doesn't drink,
Does he not?
I don't think so.
Oh,
Last time
okay.
I checked.
All right.
But
I don't
you're
wanna get in
so
trouble
right.
then.
He's very grumpy to anyone who isn't basically the Queen, especially journalists.
Right, moving on. We know from the comments and his hundreds of thousands of followers on social media that lots of you want to get a bit closer to our very own Richard Eden. Well, now you can get even closer than before by ordering a video from him on Cameo. Isn't that right, Mr. Eden?
Yeah, I don't know if the viewers have heard of this. There's a website called Cameo, it's a bit of fun. It's
Oh,
just
they're
where
furiously Googling right now.
No, it's good fun actually. You can order greetings from people you might know from TV or YouTube or whatever. And then in this case I will deliver a personalised greeting. So
Okay.
as long as it's fun and
all above board.
in a good spirit, exactly.
Well, if you want a personal message from Richard, maybe a birthday wish or a pep talk while you do the laundry, or perhaps you'd like him to make a video where he models socks. Just an idea. Put in a request on Cameo and he will deliver it, and we'll put that link on screen now and in the description below. Will you be requesting one, Charlotte?
Definitely.
I feel like I've seen enough of
I
him.
want you to say, Charlotte, you're the best diarist Fleet Street has ever known.
Ooh, how much is that going to cost you, Richard?
There are some things you can't buy.
Well, we've got lots of comments from you from last week's show, and our first one comes from Michelle Shaw, who calls herself a Colorado mountain woman. She left this comment on the latest episode of Acting Royal. This was fun, Acting Royal. Nice to see another side of you three. Keep up the creative humour that you've been hiding so well. Love you, a Colorado mountain woman. And a reminder that you can check out Acting Royal after this show. Rosemary wrote after we ran a video of Katherine, Princess of Wales, talking to cancer patients last week. She said, "Thank you for sharing the clip of Princess Kate telling of her cancer journey after the treatment. I can't tell you how heartening that was. Things are different. You are different. This is something no one tells you about. At least I've never heard anyone talk about it. Hearing Princess Kate talk about it literally brought me to tears. It validated my feelings and made me feel that who I am now after the treatment is okay. If someone as active as she is was struggling too, it makes me feel better about myself. I'm not alone. I get it. You're not alone." Rosemary, we just want to give you a big hug. We are wishing you and all of our viewers who wrote similar messages about your own cancer experiences really all the best from all of us here at Powerless Confidential. Now, moving on to the Royal Wave section of the comments now. This is my Royal Wave. Remember the Queen, we always used to emulate it. Last week, we shouted out to those tuning in Albania and Gibraltar. And so hi to Janita and Zamira and to Janet in Gibraltar. Closer to home, Joanna Lavelle writes, what about you giving out a shout out to the Isle of Wight? Oh, I love the Isle of Wight. I, along with so many others, watch Palace Confidential every week. Princess Anne visits quite often, especially in Cowes Week. The royal family, including the late Queen Elizabeth, along with Prince Philip, used to visit each year in the royal yacht. So does that mean there's a whole gang of you together watching Palace in the Isle of Wight? Do let us know. We also had a few commenters from Africa this week. So many from South Africa, they deserve their own shout out at some point. Here are a couple more. I'm not on an exotic island, but in the greatest city in Africa, Nairobi. And I just absolutely love your show, and especially Richard, Garden of Eden. Nellie from Kenya. It was a similar message from over the western border in Uganda, where viewer Kainam Babazi says, I'm a loyal fan watching from Kampala, Uganda. Special wave to Richard, Garden of Eden. Well, you'll notice that they're both using Richard's nickname that we uncovered last week, and it seems that a few of you also do that. You're just so famous these days, Richard Gardenov. Here are a few more nicknames from you for our Richard. We've got Dragon Thistle, who says, when Richard is introduced, I always think of the Garden of Eden. I personally just call him Richard the Handsome. Oh, your head's just going to get so swelled.
Me. This is making me blush.
Lorena says, High Tide Pants is my nickname for Richard. His pant legs are so short.
Whoa.
It looks like he's waiting for the tide to come in. Right. And Eileen Cohn says, my nickname for Richard is Socks and Hands, like Fox and Hounds. Okay. This is my favourite part of the week so far. Richie Peachy was one from Larissa. We also spotted a Richie Rich in there.
All right, this is quite enough.
No, I don't think it is. I'm still going. Meanwhile, Mandy Nee says, no nickname for Richard, but we do call a tie in a certain shade of pink a Richard Eden. Don't ruin pink for me, you guys. While Rich Manhattanite says, you don't even want to know the nicknames I have for our dear Richard that are not appropriate for the public.
Oh my goodness.
Wow, it's all happening in Manhattan.
Speechless, absolutely speechless. Well, I suspect a few of you will now be asking Richard for a cameo in Just a Fig Leaf. Please keep those comments coming in, Richard or un-Richard related, and let us know where and what time you're watching. It's great fun. We love speaking to our Palace community all over the world, don't we? Now let's bring the panel back in now, get back to royal news. We're following up a chat we had last week about the late Queen's relationship with Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. Richard, your fellow Right Royal Richard, Mr. Richard Kay, has written his own follow-up where he talks about this apparent silence that the late Majesty gave Harry. What's this all about?
Yeah, this was a really interesting feature. I mean, the viewers will be able to find it online still. And it followed up what we discussed last week about Lady Elizabeth Anson, Queen Elizabeth's cousin and great friend, and what she had allegedly said about Meghan and her relationship with the Queen. And what Richard had, he had spoken to a switchboard operator at the palace, actually. Richard's got great contacts.
Good Lord.
Yeah, and this was one, what he said was very interesting. The switchboard operator said that when she used to put callers through to the Queen would always immediately say, oh, thank you very much, and she'd always say something nice, you know. But on this occasion, she was putting Prince Harry through from America. I think it was during lockdown, perhaps. Mm-hmm. And so there was just a very awkward, long, silent pause. And this made the switchboard operator think, oh, what's going on here? And like the Queen did take the call eventually, so she put her through. But she said that's the first time, I think, ever that she just had that long, silent pause. So you can almost sort of hear Queen Elizabeth thinking, oh, you know, do I have to take that call?
She's probably bracing herself. You know, every call from Harry around that time was another dose of bad news or a complaint or a grumble or a problem.
Well, remember that
I want to know how long the silence was. Do we have that?
Yeah.
It's like, yeah.
I mean, Harry had spoken a lot, and in his memoirs again, he had this sort of idea that if he had his grandmother on her own in a meeting, that she would say one thing and it would be completely different from what he would hear via the courtiers. And that was something he felt really strongly.
Is it, you know, speaking out of turn, I slightly suspect that he desperately wanted to believe that when actually she was, the courtiers were doing what they're asked to do.
Yeah, reflecting her wishes, because of course she was the boss. She was the boss of the whole firm. They wouldn't go behind her back and act on a decision that she would wholeheartedly disagree with. So I think you're completely right with what you just said.
I think it was comforting for him to think that something he didn't agree with wouldn't have been her view.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because we've had stressed time and time again this glowing, positive portrayal of Harry's relationship with his grandmother, but there's some reports coming out now that really just sort of like give a different slant.
Yeah, more and more there's now a picture emerging of a queen that wasn't that affectionate towards her son, her grandson towards the end, basically, is the only way I can put it, really. And in fact, quite hurt by his behaviour. Because, you know, when they were bending the rules and changing things to suit themselves in the build-up to their wedding, I didn't really ever acknowledge that these kind of things were actually hurting the Queen's feelings. You know, they were cutting her out. That's a picture that's emerged in the last couple of weeks. They were cutting her out of the wedding. And that when they made these little tweaks, they offended her. And she was actually quite upset. And I'd never really thought about it that way. I thought she was probably, you know, exasperated. But I didn't realise she was hurt and offended. And that's, you know, more and more reports are coming out suggesting that's the case.
I remember we had quite a bit of this out in the open at the time. For example, Harry made that public comment about, I want to make sure that my grandmother's got the right people around
I thought that
her.
was extraordinary.
And that was really offensive. And that was taken at the time to be a reference to maybe Angela, sorry, I forget her
Angela
surname.
Kelly.
Angela Kelly.
You know, known as AK-47 because of her sort of confrontational nature. And obviously she wasn't a fan of Harry and Meghan. That seemed to be clear.
But I also think there's an inference in that comment that she's this frail old lady who's vulnerable and easily manipulated and all. And do you know what I mean? I thought that was a bit sort of patronising.
Well, it was definitely patronising.
Yeah.
We know this in the sense that the Queen met the new Prime Minister 2 days before her death. She met the outgoing one, Boris Johnson, and the incoming one, Liz Truss. And even though she was very ill at that point, she clearly still had her marbles, you know?
Yeah, completely with it. And it was very, very poignant in her assessment of Meghan, by all accounts. Said that, well, through Lady Elizabeth Anson, said that perhaps she engineered the whole thing. I thought that was absolutely fascinating. She was a very shrewd woman.
Well, interesting. Now, let's move on to another wayward royal, Richard, Prince Andrew. We've had some news about him this week in connection to the convicted sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein, haven't we?
Yes, I mean, this is news which, I have to say, you know, friends of Andrew are saying, oh, it's good news, but you're always thinking, not sure. But it's that the FBI no longer want to speak to him, because it had always been their position that they wanted to interview him in relation to their inquiries concerning Jeffrey Epstein. But they don't anymore. That is now over. And what that means is that he can travel without fear that he could be detained because the FBI want to speak to him.
Now, of course, he's always denied any allegations, but it hasn't stopped. He has sort of like been reluctant to travel. But do you think that will change?
I don't think anything's going to change at home. You know, he's become almost reclusive recently and certainly exiled from the royal family.
Well, aren't we? Isn't he just sort of like scared to leave Royal Lodge in case they change the locks?
Well, I suppose there is a bit of that. He is always fearful that he might lose his accommodations. But also, he has been exiled from the royal family. He can't go to royal events. He certainly can't represent the royal family in any way. So I don't think much is going to change at home. I think in the UK, maybe he'll turn up at the odd church service in the background. But I think you're right that he might start going abroad a little bit more now, because there was always that worry, you know, that he couldn't travel to America, for example. I can imagine him going to the Middle East, you know, to see all his sort of very, very fabulously wealthy friends over there. So we might see a little bit more of him emerging from Royal Lodge, but certainly not working again.
Right, to a fun one now. Do you recognise this? Richard, what's going on here?
Oh yeah, I know a bit about this because my wife is a massive fan of Chapel Rowan, the American singer.
Oh, okay, so it's not because you're so hip, it's because your wife is.
No,
Yeah.
I can't say I'm a huge fan myself.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
anyway, it's the Colream Guards played Pink Pony Club by Chapel Rowan. The significance is it's a song about the gay scene in Los Angeles, and they were playing it as part of Pride celebrations in London. So it was a sign of solidarity with the gay community.
Nice. I like that. And it's gone viral, Charlotte. It's been seen millions of times on social media. It's interesting, isn't it? You know, people quite often see this big institution that's a bit old-fashioned, dare I say it, a bit fusty, a bit traditional, but then they pull out something like this every now and again.
Yeah, it's almost like they knew it would go viral, and if they did, then they've got some sort of marketing manager behind the scenes. But I think everyone thinks the Colream Guards are a very old school regiment, but the individuals within it, of course, are quite young and kind of cool, and that's why when Prince Harry was in the army, you know, he kind of was a wild child. We all loved him for it. He had a sense of humour. He was playful. He was cheeky.
I remember those days.
Let's not forget, army officers are great fun individually. It's just when you see them all lined up in their bearskins, they look like this kind of historic, old-fashioned, antiquated unit. But no, I think they're very cheeky underneath it all.
Oh, I thought it was lovely. Now, Richard, we should mention a pair that we did not get a chance to last week because we had so much news on. What can you tell us about Edward and Sophie?
Oh yes, yeah. I mean, often they do get overlooked slightly. We tend to
We
talk
don't
more.
mean to.
Yeah, we tend to talk more about the king, or you know what Harry and Meghan are up to, for goodness' sake. But no, in this case, it was Prince Edward. Sophie actually didn't accompany him. It was Prince Edward had a long, I think it was a 7-day solo trip to Canada. Where else to go to but Prince Edward Island?
Oh, of course, yes.
That's where he went to first
Yes,
of all.
you've got to visit your own island.
Lots of engagements. As always with Prince Edward, there were engagements connected with the Duke of Edinburgh scheme, which he is now the Duke of Edinburgh, taken over from his father. There was one lovely incident that I liked where there was a woman who approached him and said, would you like a hug? He said, okay, why not? And accepted. So, you know, there's showing, as often is the case, that the
More
royals
protocol
do
breaking, honestly. The world's going to pieces.
Anyway, Prince Edward seemed to enjoy it, but
Good.
by all accounts, he had a wonderful time. And as we know with the royal family, they're always delighted when they have a chance to visit Canada.
And we know that the Canadians really are very into the royal family, particularly at the moment, aren't they? Just like
And well, this follows
Yeah.
the King's recent visit for the opening of Parliament.
We love that. Now, Charlotte, Sophie was also at Wimbledon this week.
Sophie was at Wimbledon with King Frederick, looking very nice. I mean, I love seeing Sophie at these kind of events, and actually they're just the perfect events for her because she represents everything that's best of British. And yeah, it was nice to see her there with Frederick.
Yeah, they seem to get on really well.
They have such a good rapport. She was joined by her personal assistant as well, and the three of them were giggling, and obviously in the front of the royal box, and it just looked like a really jolly day out. I was a bit jealous, really.
Yeah, I'm jealous of anyone who gets to go to Wimbledon, royal box or not. Oh, did you hear that? Yes, that is right. It is, of course, time to celebrate an unsung royal hero. Charlotte, you have the honour of nominating this week. Who are you going to nominate?
Well, Tash, lovely Tash, Natasha Archer, has been dressing Katherine for 15 years. And now she's leaving to set up her own business.
Oh.
And I think it'll be really sad for Katherine. They're really, really close. You know, they're gal pals. They're friends in real life.
Why is she leaving?
She's setting up her own consultancy business, but she's been a sort of stylist and assistant really to Katherine and confidant. And she married Chris Jackson, the royal photographer. So they're really part of that inner circle, the trusted circle. But, you know, all good things come to an end. I know they'll stay friends, but Tash is going to leave. And I think we'll probably see a slightly different style from Katherine now, because Tash had that kind of very English, sort of old-fashioned sort of Katherine look, whereas now she might start wearing a lot more couture, very forward-going fashion, you know, a little bit more edgy perhaps without Tash there.
Is there a formal vacancy now, or will there be somebody already internally who will pick that role up?
There'll be somebody lined up. I do wonder whether for the French visit maybe the new stylist has already started working, because Katherine wore that very couture sort of Dior look, which actually isn't Tash's natural style.
Okay.
Tash is behind all those kind of polka dot dresses and the nude courts, you know, that we used to know really well and love for Katherine, but she's kind of moving into a new era now, so I think her style might change too without Tash there.
Interesting.
My suspicion is, as with often with William and Catherine, staff might return. You know, yes, she's setting up a consultancy, but it wouldn't surprise me if she sort of came back to give style advice perhaps to
Yes,
Katherine
to still
as
be on
well.
hand every now and again.
Or
yeah.
just real advice, you know, these two are friends, you know,
Yeah.
they're girlfriends. So she might pick up the phone and ask Tash for advice here and there about everything and anything.
Well, but obviously we all wish Tash the best of luck with this new venture. That's exciting. Well, last week we brought you the sad news that the royal train was to be decommissioned as discussed before. That brought out a lot of comments from you, so we thought we'd commemorate the train with some of our favourite pictures of the royals with it over the years. Oh, farewell, old friend. Richard still hopes someone might create a new royal train one of these days. Keep an eye out early next week for a special Q&A episode of the show, and a reminder that you can see now more of Charlotte and Richard in our Acting Royals Marathon, which is up next. Click here for that. It's just time to say thanks to them for being on my panel and to you, of course, for watching. We will see you next week. Bye-bye.